Wyoming Territory, early spring, 1882, the wind rolled in cold from the mountains. But it was the torn piece of paper tangled in a sagebrush fence that stopped Gideon Jasper in his tracks. He dismounted, boots crunching over frosted grass, and tugged the scrap free. The ink had run in places, but the words still clung to the page like a last breath. I don't know if you ever got my first letter. My name is Hattie Kline. I was meant to come west as a mail-order bride, but I was lied to. I'm not safe here. If you're reading this, please, that was all. Torn jagged on the bottom, like the rest had been ripped away, Gideon stared out across the empty land. He was supposed to be driving cattle north, but something in those few lines dug under his skin. He folded the paper carefully, slid it inside his coat, and turned his horse east toward town. By the end of the day, he had gathered 3 more torn pieces from the same fence line, strung out for miles like breadcrumbs. Each one filled in more of the story, a promise made through a mail order service, a man named Langley who brought her west, and a final line that hit like a blow: he is not who he said he was. Gideon did not sleep that night. He laid out the scraps on the table at the back of the saloon, piecing them together like a map. He did not know her face or her voice, but he knew what desperation sounded like. He had heard it once before, years back, when his sister cried out for help and no one came in time. He would not let that happen again. By morning he had her name, a destination: Wagon Hollow, Montana, and enough of a story to follow. He packed light, left a note for the ranch hands, and rode out before the sun crested the hills. Hattie Kline stood at the edge of the logging camp, her arms wrapped tight around herself as the wind kicked up sawdust and the sharp tang of pine. Her fingers were raw from chopping wood and washing the men's clothes in the ice-fed creek. Langley had brought her here under the promise of marriage and a homestead. Instead, he traded her labor for supplies and shelter, keeping her under tight watch. When she tried to leave, he had grabbed her hard enough to bruise. When she spoke out, he told the others she was his wife. No one questioned it, but she had written letters. She had hidden them in her skirts, and when she caught a ride with a supply wagon, she flung them into the wind when the driver was not looking, praying one would reach anyone kind enough to care. She had not dared to hope. Not really. Gideon reached Wagon Hollow 5 days later, his coat stiff with trail dust, beard thick on his jaw. The town was rough, mostly men working the timber line, and not a soul had heard the name Hattie Kline. He pressed a silver dollar into the hand of a stable boy who mentioned a woman up at Langley's camp, a few miles north. "Pretty thing," the boy said. "Looks like she does not belong." Gideon rode hard, heart pounding. He kept his eyes sharp as the trees thickened and the trail narrowed. He spotted the camp at dusk, rough-hewn cabins, smoke curling from chimneys, and men moving slow after a long day's work. He kept to the edge, waited until night fell, then slipped from his saddle and walked the perimeter, quiet as mist. He found her hauling water in the dark, her hair tucked under a kerchief. She looked thinner than he expected. Worn, but when she glanced up and caught sight of him, something flickered in her eyes, fear first, then something like disbelief. "Hattie," he asked, voice low. She stepped back. "Who are you?" "I read your letter, the pieces of it. I came to find you." She stared at him, mouth parting, then pressing shut again. Her hand tightened around the bucket's handle. You read it." He nodded and pulled the folded scraps from his coat. "I have them all." Her eyes filled with tears so fast it startled him. She did not cry out, she just crumpled a little, like her knees gave out from the weight of it all. "You came," she whispered. "I came." He caught her before she hit the ground. They waited until morning. She packed quietly while he kept watch by the door. Langley was out hunting with 2 men, and the others kept to themselves. Hattie moved quickly, heart hammering. "I do not have much," she said. "You do not need much," Gideon said. When they slipped past the cabins, she paused just once to look back. Then she took his hand. They rode fast, cutting west into the trees, following the old wagon trail. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley, both of them breathless and shaking. "I did not think anyone would come," she said. "I had to," he said. "You asked for help." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why you?" He shrugged. "I lost someone once. No one helped her. I could not live with that again." She reached out, touched his arm. Her hand was cold. "Thank you." He looked down at her fingers, small and trembling, and wrapped his hand around hers. "You are safe now." They rode until dark, then made camp under the stars. She sat close to the fire, quiet, her eyes distant. He did not press her to speak. Instead, he cooked beans and coffee, handed her a plate, and kept the fire going. Later, when the night grew colder, she edged closer to him. "Do you live alone?" she asked. "For now," he said. "Do you want to keep it that way?" He looked at her, long and careful. "No," she nodded, slow. "Good." He laid down his bedroll beside hers. They did not touch. But when she fell asleep, she shifted closer until her shoulder pressed against his, and he stayed awake most of the night, watching the fire die low, feeling the weight of her trust settle warm in his chest. The morning came quiet, soft as breath against Gideon's face. The sky stretched pale and cloudless above, sun just cresting the far ridgeline. Hattie was already up, squatting by the fire pit and coaxing flame from what little kindling they had left. Her sleeves were rolled and she'd braided her hair tight against the wind. She didn't look at him right away. "I boiled snow," she said. "It ain't much, but it's warm." He took the tin cup she offered, fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. They ate jerky and a heel of rye bread in silence. The woods around them crackled with melt and bird call. When they packed up, Hattie folded her blanket with careful precision, brushing off needles and pine dust as if the act itself steadied her. "We should reach the Sweetwater Fork by dusk," Gideon said, tightening the cinch on his mare. "There's an old line cabin near the bluff. If it's still standing, we can rest there a spell." She nodded once, gaze fixed on the horizon. "I ain't askin' where you're tackin' me. I just want to know if there's a place I can be my own." "There is." Their horses moved slow through the thawing forest, hooves sucking at the damp earth. Hattie rode close behind, her eyes always moving, watching birds take flight, the way branches leaned, anything that might show another rider's path. She never asked if Langley would follow. She didn't need to. By mid-morning, the trail narrowed along a steep ridge where snow still clung to the shaded ledges. Gideon dismounted, leading his horse along the edge, boots slipping some on the slick stone. Hattie followed without complaint, her jaw set. When they reached flatter ground, she exhaled hard and sat on a boulder to catch her breath. Her hands trembled slightly. "How long you been out this way?" she asked, rubbing her palms together. "Since I was 16, he said. "Drifted north after my uncle took sick. Settled near the Platte when I got old enough to buy land. You got family?" "Not anymore." She looked at him then, not with pity, but something quieter. "I used to wish I had brothers, somebody to fight for me." He crouched to tie a loose strap on her saddle. "You shouldn't have needed anyone to." "I know," she said, "but I did." They rode on. The day warmed, and with it the snow softened. They crossed a narrow stream by late afternoon, Hattie's skirts catching in the flow, soaking through to her knees. She didn't complain. Just wrung them out while Gideon lit a pipe and kept watch. "I was a seamstress," she said, wrinkling her wet hem. "Before all this, in St. Louis. Worked in the back of a dry goods store, mended for the German families mostly." He let the smoke curl from his mouth before answering. "You good with a needle, better than I ever was with words," she said. "Especially the kind men want to hear." He offered her a dry coat from his pack. She hesitated, then took it and pulled it on over her dress. It dwarfed her, but she didn't seem to mind. The line cabin came into view near dusk, squat and leaning, but still upright. Gideon pushed open the warped door, and a burst of trapped cold greeted them. Inside, it was dusty but dry. A rusted stove stood in the corner. A broken rocking chair leaned against the wall. He set about clearing the hearth while Hattie hung their blankets along the beams to dry. Once the fire caught, casting orange across the rough walls, she sat cross-legged near it, hands open to the heat. Gideon watched the way the light played over her face, shadows softening the hollows beneath her eyes, warming the curve of her mouth. "Langley ever hit you?" he asked. Her gaze stayed fixed on the fire. "Not with fists, with other things." He didn't answer, just fed another log into the flames. Later, after they'd eaten, she stood and walked to the door, opened it. The moon was up, full and pale, casting silver across the snow outside. "I stopped dreaming," she said. "Somewhere along the way." Gideon didn't move. "You remember when?" She shook her head. "Not exactly. But I remember the last time I felt safe. It was a summer evening. I was 11. My aunt let me sleep outside on the porch swing. There were bees in the lavender, and the sky turned pink all the way to dark. I didn't know yet that the world could twist like it does. He stepped beside her and looked out into the night. You ever think it could twist back? She glanced up at him. I don't know, but I want to. Their breath mingled in the air, white and fleeting. Inside, the fire popped and hissed. He reached for her hand, slower this time. She didn't pull back. I ain't asking for anything more than what you want to give, he said. I know, she said. That's why I'll give it. She leaned into his side, and they stood like that, quiet, close, real, while the wind moved low across the pines. By the third day, spring had settled deeper into the land. The snow no longer lingered in the open, and the air carried the faded scent of thawed earth and pine pitch. The line cabin stood behind them now, just another place passed through, not a place to stay. Gideon led them west into the lower hills, toward the edge of the Medicine Bow Range, where the terrain opened into long, sloping pastureland broken only by creek beds and stands of cottonwood. Hattie rode beside him now, not behind. Her shoulders had squared some. She no longer flinched at every snap of a twig under hoof. She kept one hand loose at her hip, where the small knife she'd taken from Langley's stores rested in a leather sheath. She hadn't asked if he thought she needed it. He hadn't offered an opinion. They reached his homestead near sundown. It was modest, one room, a lean-to shed out back, fencing that sagged in places but the roof held, and the door was tight against weather. A pair of hens scratched at the packed dirt yard. The pasture beyond had begun to green. Hattie dismounted slow, eyes sweeping across the place without speaking. I built it myself, Gideon said, leading her mare toward the shed. Took 4 summers to get it right. You live here year-round? Mostly. I ride north in fall to help with the cattle drive. Otherwise, I keep to myself. She ran her fingers along the porch rail, rough-hewn and sun-bleached. It's quiet, he nodded. That's how I like it. She looked over her shoulder then. Think I'll like it too. That night, she stood silent inside the cabin while he lit the lantern and stirred the coals in the stove. She didn't ask where to sleep. He laid out fresh blankets along the cot and took his bedroll to the far corner. She didn't correct him, only watched as he settled in with his back to the wall. Wind pressed against the shutters through the night. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called across the draw, long and low. Neither of them slept much. By morning, she had tied her hair back with a strip of muslin and was already outside, sleeves rolled, hauling water from the well. He heard the creak of the bucket and stepped outside to see her standing with the morning light catching in the curve of her throat. I'll need thread and needles, she said, and vinegar if you want the hens to keep laying. There's a mercantile in Elk Hollow, he said. 2 days' ride, she nodded. I can make do until then. Later, while he stacked wood along the back wall, she swept out the cabin with a pine branch broom, humming low under her breath. The sound was worn, but not bitter. Near midday, she stepped outside with a torn linen shirt of his in hand. You tear this clearing brush, barbed wire, he said, glancing at the frayed sleeve. Caught it last month. I can mend it, won't be pretty. Don't need pretty, just need it to hold. She didn't smile, but something softened around her eyes. She took the shirt inside. That evening, he found her sitting on the porch steps, mending in her lap, her bare feet tucked beneath her skirt. The air was warmer now, the breeze carrying the scent of willows budding by the creek. I used to think I'd end up in Kansas, she said. Flat land, wind all the time. There was a man once from Topeka. He wrote letters, said he wanted a wife who could read. What happened? He changed his mind when I told him I wasn't meek. She tied off the thread in a sharp motion and held the shirt up to the fading light. He said I sounded like trouble. Gideon leaned against the porch post, arms folded. You, she glanced up, expression unreadable. I've been called worse. He stepped down beside her and took the shirt from her hands, thumb brushing the seam she'd stitched. It held tight. You're not trouble, he said. No, he looked straight at her. You're a woman who got lied to. That's not the same. She looked away then, down the slope where the grass swayed in the fading light. Sometimes it feels the same. He didn't push her. They sat together as the sun dropped behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the pasture. When the sky turned indigo and the stars came clear, she spoke again. "You ever think about starting over?" "I did once," he said. "Then time passed. Got used to the quiet. You still want it?" "I want something steady," he said. "Not quiet, not anymore." She turned then, eyes meeting his for the first time in full dark. "I don't know how to be steady, not yet." "I can wait," he said. She reached for his hand, slow and certain. "Just don't let go." "I won't." And he didn't, not that night, not ever. The rain came in the night, light at first, then heavier, drumming steady against the roof. Hattie blinked awake to the sound, tucked under wool blankets in the cot, the warmth of the cabin holding against the damp cold outside. Gideon was already up, crouched by the door, pulling on his boots with a quiet focus that hadn't softened since she'd met him. She sat up and swung her legs down, the wood floor cool against her bare feet. "You going to the barn?" she asked. He nodded, standing. "Fence lines low on the east side. If that creek swells, we'll lose the west pasture." "I'll shore it best I can." She reached for her skirt folded across the stool. "I'll come." I didn't ask if you needed," she said, looking up. "I said I'll come." He paused, then gave a single nod and stepped aside to let her pass. Outside, the world was gray and blurred in mist. The barn's roof glistened, and the grass soaked their boots before they reached the gate. Hattie hitched her skirts and took the hammer and nails he offered without a word. They worked in rhythm, Gideon hauling fresh rails from the lean-to while she braced the posts and fixed the iron stays. Her hands were red and wet by midday, but she didn't slow. When the last rail settled into place, he straightened and looked across the pasture. "You ever build fencing before?" he asked. "No," she said, wiping her palms on her skirt, "but I've sewed corset boning through leather." This wasn't much different. He chuckled once, low in his chest. She hadn't heard that sound from him before. Back in the cabin, they peeled off soaked coats and hung them by the stove. Hattie stoked the fire higher while he laid out dry clothes. Neither said much. The air inside had warmed, but the quiet between them held weight, not distance, just something forming, slow and solid. By evening, the rain had thinned to a misting fog. Hattie stirred barley into a pot over the fire, adding dried onions and a pinch of salt. Gideon sat at the table, sharpening his blade with long, even strokes. She ladled soup into 2 bowls and set one before him. "I found a wasp's nest in the rafters," she said. "Empty now, but I'll knock it down come morning." He took a bite, then met her eyes. "You planning to stay that long?" She didn't answer right off. "You want me to leave?" "No," he said, "but I've been waiting on you to decide." She looked toward the window, rain tracing ribbons down the glass. "There's nothing left to go back to. And nothing ahead I'd trust more than what's here." He set down his spoon. "Then let's build something better than what was behind." She nodded, slow. "But I want my name on the deed." He smiled, not with his mouth, but in the way his shoulders eased. "You'll have it." After supper, Hattie cleared the bowls while Gideon trimmed the lampwick. The cabin glowed gold in the dark, shadows dancing along the log walls. She moved to the cot, folded the blanket back, then paused. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't want to sleep separate anymore." He stood, crossed the room, and stopped just before her. "Then don't." She stepped closer, slid her hand into his. His fingers curled around hers, not with urgency, but with a steadiness that made her chest ache. "I don't expect you to fix what's already happened to me," she said. "I wouldn't try," he said, "but I'll be the place you rest from it." She leaned into him then, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her like something he meant to keep. Outside, the rain slowed to a hush. Inside, the fire burned low, and 2 people stood at the center of it, all not saved, not healed, but choosing each other anyway. The first calf was born in early May. Hattie found it at dawn, legs still wet from birth, wobbling beside its mother in the far corner of the pasture. She didn't call for Gideon. Just climbed through the gate, skirts bunched in one hand, and moved slow, careful through the dew-soaked grass. The cow was calm, eyes watchful but not wary. Hattie crouched, watching the calf nudge for milk, its hide slick and trembling. By the time Gideon joined her, she was leaning against the fence rail, arms folded, streaks of mud drying along the hem of her dress. "Healthy?" he asked. "Looks it." He nodded once, then followed her gaze to the calf. "You want to name it?" She looked at him sideways. You name your stock, not usually, he said, but I'd let you break the rule. She turned back to the pasture. Not yet, she said. Let's see if it lives a while first. That afternoon, she planted onions. She'd cleared the patch near the porch with her hands and a spade, breaking up the soil slowly, her back sore by the time the rows were ready. Gideon brought her a bucket of ash from the stove and stood watching as she worked it into the dirt. You ever kept a garden before? He asked. Only windowsill herbs, she said. But I read enough to know onion roots won't stand in wet ground. He crouched beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. You want me to build a raised bed? Let's see if they take first, she said. I don't want anything coddled. They worked in companionable silence, the kind that didn't press or fill space, just let it settle, like dust in sunlight. That evening, she found an old ledger tucked behind a pile of scrap tin in the shed. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the ink still held. Gideon had kept records in a tidy hand, weather supply orders, livestock counts. She sat at the table after supper, flipping through the dates. You tracked the moon cycles, she said. And rainfall down to the inch. Helps to know what to expect, he said. She traced a line from 4 years past. You stopped writing the winter after your sister died. He didn't flinch. I did, she set the ledger down. Would it help if I started again? He looked at her a long moment. It might, so she began keeping notes. Every morning before chores, she sat at the table with the stub of a pencil and recorded what the sky held, what the hens laid, what she planted, and where. She never used flourishes or wasted words, just the facts straight and true. But sometimes she added a line about Gideon's laugh, or the way the creek sounded after rain. By June, the weather turned warm enough to sleep with the windows unlatched. The honeysuckle bloomed wild along the fence posts, and bees moved slow in the heat. One evening, they shelled peas on the porch, baskets between them. I've been thinking, Gideon said, voice low, about building on. She didn't look up from her pod. More space, there's no rush, he said. But if you wanted a room with a door that shuts, it wouldn't be hard to raise a wall. She smiled faintly, not lifting her eyes. We'd need to cut timber. I've got enough milled from last fall. She paused, fingers still. Then yes, I'd like that. They worked on the addition together. She learned to use a plane to square a frame, to drive nails straight without splitting the boards. Her hands blistered and healed. By July, the frame stood tall, with windows facing east where the sun rose early. Later that month, Gideon brought down a mirror from the attic rafters, wrapped in old sacking and dust. He hung it in the new room without a word. Hattie stood in front of it that night, brushing her hair with slow strokes, watching the way her face had changed, not softer, but steadier. She turned to find him watching from the doorway. You remember what you said, she said. About being the place I could rest. I meant it. I believe that now. She crossed the room and laid her hands flat against his chest. But I don't want to just rest. I want to build. He kissed her then, careful still, but without hesitation. They married under the cottonwoods in late August. No preacher, no papers, just two people with hands clasped beside the creek, vows spoken quiet and sure. She wore a blue dress she'd sewn from muslin, and he wore his cleanest shirt, the one she'd mended that spring. They didn't invite anyone. There was no one to invite. That night they laid together in the new room, the window open to the warm air. She curled into him, her back to his chest, his arm draped across her ribs. His breath tickled the space behind her ear. You happy? He murmured. She didn't answer right away, just pulled his hand tighter around her waist. Yes, she said, but more than that, I'm safe and I'm wanted. That's better than happy. He kissed the curve of her shoulder. You're both. They slept with their limbs tangled, the way people do when the walls are strong and the doors stay open. Years passed. The pasture grew thick with calves, then steers. The garden spread to 3 beds, then 5. Hattie kept the ledger by the window, its pages full of years and rows and days when the creek ran high. She never stopped writing. She wove rugs from scraps of cloth and taught herself to pickle beans. Gideon built her a rocker from pine, and she sat in it most evenings, a book in her lap, his hand warm against her knee. They aged together without ceremony. He grew more silver at the temples. She laughed more often, lines deepening around her mouth, and they never left. Because love, when it's built plank by plank, row by row, doesn't need to go far. It just needs soil that holds and hands that keep showing up, and they did. Every day, for the rest of their lives.